Our fully renovated mid-century property, located in the heart of downtown Lexington, is lovingly crafted to immerse you in the very best of authentic Central Kentucky culture. 340 is your short-term home base for experiencing all things Kentucky. Modern luxury meets traditional bluegrass at 340 Broadway. We invite you to live like a local and experience the best of the bluegrass right outside your front door. Call it the horse capital of the world, bourbon country, or the bluegrass. We call it home, and we want to share it with you. 340lex.com.
With Liquor Barn, you can shop your favorite bourbon, that perfect bottle of wine, or discover something new. To place an order for pickup or delivery, download the Liquor Barn app, visit liquorbarn.com, or call your nearest Liquor Barn location. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list for all the latest news on products, promotions, and events. Liquor Barn, where Kentuckians go to celebrate life. Cheers!
Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast, presented by 340 Lex. We appreciate their sponsorship. They are downtown Lexington. Check them out online at 340lex.com. They're our presenting sponsor this week, and we appreciate them and all of our sponsors as well. But welcome to the podcast. Matt is with me tonight here in the Bourbon Life Studios, otherwise known as my basement. He's got his beanie on again tonight, hanging out in front of the fireplace. Matt, it's not that cold outside. How you doing, though?
You know, it really is not that cold, but if I'm going to have the fireplace on, and it is Thanksgiving week, 2022 here,
That's
so
right.
Although it wasn't that cold today, it was brisk over the weekend.
Yeah, man, what's going on with, it's kind of crazy how Kentucky weather, but, you hang around long enough and it'll change. There's no question about it. So we went from the teens as the lows, and now we're back in the 60s, almost up to 70 degrees or something today. So it's kind of a nice little change of pace. Hopefully it'll stick that way for a little while. But yeah, man, it's the Thanksgiving week. Last week we did our Friendsgiving Spectacular. Matt, you made a great meal for all of us, which was a lot of fun. We got to eat some great food. We appreciate that. And we had some people reach out asking about the recipes as well, Matt. So that'll be cool. You can share those with everybody, and they can hopefully experiment and try to make some of your bourbon themed food as well, man. So you got any big plans though for Thanksgiving?
Yeah, do Thanksgiving with the family. I think it's going to be pretty low key. We're lower in numbers this year because some people couldn't make it, but it never stops me from rolling up my sleeves and getting elbow deep in a turkey.
That just sounds really weird. I'm not even going to go there, Matt. So, but it sounds like a good time with your family, man. So that's awesome. We don't have any plans. We're low key. We did our Thanksgiving this past weekend. So we've already done it.
So you've already
we're just gonna be hanging
through
out.
all the leftovers?
Well, we actually went out. My parents came down and we went out to dinner for Thanksgiving with them. So that's it. That's about it. We're going to make some dinner for some friends, not some friends, actually, for the people at Liquor Barn. I do that every year for Thanksgiving since they work. I actually smoke a couple of Boston butts, and we make some baked beans and some mac and cheese, and we take it all up there so the people that are working on Thanksgiving can have a little bit of something fun to eat.
What a good guy. You have to take care of your constituents. You are the mayor.
The mayor of Liquor Barn, right? Yeah. Anyway, enough about us, Matt. We got a great show lined up tonight. I'm excited about this one. We've been talking about doing this one for a while. So you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
I would love to. I'm going to go with the full title that you've got typed out here just to do your notes justice at the beginning, Mark. But we have the founder and CEO of Brown Water Spirits, the producer of O.H. Ingram River Aged Whiskey, Hank Ingram. Hank, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Matt, Mark, great to be with you guys.
Yeah, man, we're happy to have you on here. We've had the opportunity to meet you and talk to you a couple of different times, so it's been fun. We always enjoy getting to see you, meet you, talk to you in person. We've talked about having you on the show. I think we talked at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. You were there. Were you at Bourbon on the Banks? You were at Bourbon on the Banks as well,
We made the full Kentucky circuit this year, yeah.
That's what I thought. That's right. And then was it Scott? Scott was at the the Breeders' Cup, the bourbon experience here in Lexington a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, yeah, you ran into him, so I was there just the next day.
Were you? Okay.
He has a lot better luck than me. He said, "Hey man, I got cast as an extra, and like all these girls wanted to know, what I was going to be doing the rest of the night." And I said, "Well, I had some guy come over there and talk to me for about 45 minutes about, so what do you mean river aged?" So we had a totally different experience.
Well, it's funny because, and we'll talk about Scott a little bit later, but a friend of mine that was there, she was like, "Hey, take a picture of me with him." So I took like 3 or 4 pictures of her hanging out with him, holding up bottles. I think I've seen him on Instagram and Facebook. So yeah, he seemed to be a popular guy.
Look, Hank, I know how this works. Mark goes to all these fancy dinners and gets invited to all these events and galas for the Bourbon Life and everything. And I'm sitting at home with a dog all night, or curled up in front of his fireplace while he's out doing something. So I know what it's like to live in a shadow.
Someone has to keep the flame burning, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right, man. That's right. Well, we're happy to have you with us tonight, Hank. It's like I said, we've talked about it for a while and had the opportunity to meet you in person. So it's always fun when we actually have met our guests before to have them on the show. So we're looking forward to this one. And you guys sent us some samples, and we're really looking forward to that. So I tell you what we could do, if you want to, before we get sidetracked with our conversation, if you want to tell everybody what we have poured up for this first round, and just kind of walk us through that, so we know what we're tasting, and our listeners will know what we have as well. That'd be great.
Absolutely. So this is our first product that we released. It is our Straight Whiskey, River Aged. It's been on our barge for at least 3 years. It's a mix of a bourbon and a rye mash bill together. So 96 proof. I think it's a lovely drinker, and my girlfriend wants everyone to know this is her favorite.
So this was the first one. So it's a blend of Scotch. I almost said Scotch. It's a blend of bourbon and rye, correct? Is that what you said?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. And this is coming in at 96 proof. So on this one, can you tell us now on the back of the sample bottle that I've got, it says aged at least 3 years. And then it says also distilled in Kentucky. So both products are distilled in Kentucky, or is it different?
All 3 of our expressions are Kentucky now. Originally, when we started, we were sourced through MGP, but now everything is contract fill, actually, with Green River at Owensboro. So, this all of this was distilled in Kentucky and aged on the bank of the Mississippi River, but on the Kentucky side.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that process, because that's really unique. That's what makes you guys a very different story, and we'll talk about all that coming up in the second round, so people get a understanding of what it is you guys do. But talking about Green River, we really appreciate Jacob down there. Hate that he had moved on, but he has put out some high quality stuff down there. So yeah, man, that's great that you guys work with them down there. So they've been contract distilling now for you guys on this, and so that we got a blend of bourbon and rye, 96 proof. Matt, I'm going to jump to you. You've been nosing over there. What do you pick up on the nose on this one?
It's got really great attributes from both a bourbon and a rye, or at least notes that I would find typical from both a bourbon and a rye. It's got a nice sweetness right up front, like a honey, or kind of like a sweet nutty, like a honey roast cashew type sweetness. Then it definitely lends itself to a little bit of floral notes, like a honeysuckle, it's kind of a springtime bloom type note. And then there's also definitely some influence from the rye. It's got kind of some herbal undernotes. There's a little bit of mint, maybe like a little dill, or just like a nice, like fresh cut grass or fresh cut like flower stem aroma as well. So it strikes a nice balance that brings a lot of characteristics that I would consider really pleasant in both a bourbon and a rye.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. You can pick out notes on both. It's interesting. One of the things that struck me, you're talking about the herbalness to it. It almost reminds me of when I was a kid and we used to have that sour grass that you could chew on. It kind of had this nice little herbal flavor to it. It didn't smell sour, but just had this. You said fresh cut grass, Matt. So that kind of blends into that herbalness, that cut grass type of aroma coming from the rye, but then also those bourbon notes come through as well. So definitely a unique blend, and I really like that. So, Hank, let's talk about you a little bit. I mean, that's why we're here. Nobody wants to hear Matt and I go on and on about the whiskey. So let's talk about you, Hank. Can you tell everybody a little bit about your background, where you're from, and a little bit about your background and how you ended up getting into the whiskey world?
Absolutely. Well, I won't bore you by going way, way back on it, so I'll just start where it gets fun. So my family's been in the barge business since the 40s, and now that's important for a lot of reasons. One, it's an interesting business being on the river. I think I've seen you might be a fan of Mark Twain, so Mark certainly captured back then whiskey going down the river and it being a part of river life. Well, we really got started back in the 40s moving oil because that's what was moving on the river back then. And as time's gone by, we've gotten into various other commodities and move a lot of corn, a lot of gravel, cement, steel, whatever. And so that's really what the lifestyle I grew up in prior to kind of my discovery of the whiskey space. I was in business school at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and while I was there, what do you do when you've got a lot of free time in business school? I joined the whiskey club, and they put on a bourbon tasting, and that was really my first experience of what is bourbon. And that was, I'm looking at it was about 8 years ago. And so with the background in the river, one of the things that really struck me was bourbon's background in river, and how it essentially was created in Kentucky, but back in the 17 and 1800s, when you were in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, there were no roads, there were no railroads, there was the river. And that was the primary point of distribution for bourbon. So that was more of a footnote in the tasting. They really wanted to get to what we were actually drinking, but it struck a chord with me, and I love to tinker, and I would have been a scientist if I'd been smarter. But I said, well, man, so whiskey used to go down the river, and being a bit of a history buff as well, I said, well, what happened back then that we aren't doing today? And so that was kind of the genesis of my idea and wanting to just experiment with something that I knew and something that I didn't, and see what I could learn about both.
Very cool. So now you grew up in the river industry, the barge industry. Did you live there on the river? I mean, because these are located, well, we'll talk about that, but you're outside of Ballard County, or in Ballard County, Kentucky. Is that right?
That's right. So, well, I live in Nashville still. Our barge business is actually based in Nashville, but it runs all the way up from New Orleans to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and over to Houston and up to Chicago and Pittsburgh. So really the Ohio and Mississippi rivers are the rivers that I've known, and the Cumberland River, because it runs through Nashville. So, being in Nashville, the Cumberland is probably the closest river I could say I really spent a lot of time on, but was certainly familiar with how the business of moving things on the river works, just growing up in the family business.
So was that something you anticipated doing as you're growing up and you're at the Owen School right there at Vanderbilt? Was that something you anticipated, hey, I'm going to go into the family business once I get out?
That was really the plan. I always knew I wanted to be a towboater. I just didn't know it was going to have a big asterisk on it. So, I'd say I've got 1 foot in the bourbon business and 1 foot in the barge business. It's a great place to be.
A towboater. Yeah, I always wanted to be a motorboater.
But I'm not even going to do the sound effect.
That's fair. That was pretty bad. Sorry. Anyway.
Anyhow, So what was it? So you're in school and you learned about bourbon. So you weren't a bourbon drinker then before really you started or joined the club or did anything?
I knew I was interested in bourbon because it burned the least of the alcohols I had to drink in college, the peer pressure, and towards the end of it, I had some friends that kind of had some early tastes for brandy and this kind of. So towards the end of college, when I was legal, would try to experiment with this, that, and the other, and I found a couple whiskeys kind of early 2010s that I fell in love with, and so. But I didn't know anything about them. I just knew I liked them. And I would say I've learned so much more in the last 7 years, in the last 3 years, even in the last year, that I never even knew that knowledge existed back when I started this thing.
So I think I read somewhere or saw somewhere that this was actually kind of a grew out of a class or something that you were involved with in school. Is that right? That you did a paper or did a presentation for? Is that true?
That's right. I joined a class called Launching the Venture.
Okay.
The whole idea was you came up with a business plan and you present it to the class. If your plan was selected as one of the top ideas by the professor, you then got to hire your classmates and they created a business plan. So I said, well, this is great. If I wanted to do this, I got free labor to put together a business plan.
You've got not just free labor, man. You've got Owen School, which is a very impressive business school. You've got Owen School classmates that are going to be able to assist you there. So that's a pretty good resume for those candidates.
Absolutely. Well, it just meant that the vocabulary was a little bigger, but everybody drinks the same. And it's funny, actually. My godfather happens to be an alcohol distributor in Tennessee, and so as I was going through the process, my dad he said, "This is crazy." Robert Lippman's his name. He said, "Robert, this is crazy what he's come up with. You got to talk to him and talk him out of it." And so I went to my godfather and he sat me down, and he's kind of got this boomy voice. He's from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and he says, "Now, Hank, tell me what you want to do." I said, "Well, Robert, I want to take barrels of whiskey and put them on a barge." He said, "Well, that's a cockamamie idea." And he said, "Well, what about airflow? And what about..." And he was asking me questions I had absolutely no idea what the heck he was talking about. And he said, "Well, tell you what. I'm going to set you up with Jeff Arnett down at Jack Daniels, and you go see what he thinks." So I go down to Jeff and with a couple of guys on my class project team, and we're starstruck because we're going to go meet the guy.
Right.
And so we climb up into the top level of one of the rick houses. We're on the 7th floor, and I never knew how much I liked Jack Daniels till I tried it straight out of the barrel. And that's when I knew, I was like, I hope this works, because I would sure love to be doing this. I'll come back to that later on. And so I posed a lot of these questions to him that I'd been asked, and he said, "Oh, that's not a problem. You can do this. You can do this." And he kind of had a few thoughts on this, that, and the other. And ultimately he said, "If that works, it could be a pretty cool idea." So I went back, sat down with my godfather and said, here's what he said about this. Here's what he said about the airflow. Here's what he said about all these other things. And my godfather said, "How much money are you raising?"
It's like, I don't know, Godfather, how much you're going to be able to throw my way.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that was really kind of the start. But taking an idea from business school and actually moving forward with it, there's a lot of things they don't teach you in business school. I remember when I was fast forward buying some experimental barrels to see if the river did anything. They said, "Okay, we need you to send us your bill of lading." I'm like, I don't know what bill of lading is. They didn't teach us that in school. I mean, why didn't I take a class on bill of lading? I mean, I was on Google and just searching for all this stuff, and they said, "Okay, well, send us an invoice." I'm like, oh crap, I guess I have to figure out what an invoice is. And so there's just little nuances that you look back on it and it's like, well, of course this is what that means, but when you're in the moment and putting all those things together, there's the learning experience of just running a business. And then there's the actual technical knowledge of making whiskey.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's funny because I went to UK business school and had a class like that, came up with the concept to do a speakeasy back before microbreweries and things are really starting to pop up, and thought, oh, this is going to be great. I could actually do this when I get out of school. But fortunately, it didn't work out because I have a feeling it probably would have flopped pretty quickly. Your concept is much smarter and obviously much more successful than mine would have been, Hank. So, all right, Matt, let's jump back to the whiskey, man. What are you picking up on this in terms of the palate and the finish?
So that's funny because I went to business school as well and had a similar class where we had to come up with a business, and we came up with a deli.
Nice.
So
you never started it though, right?
No, I never started the deli, but it does not.
Oh, that's not Jersey Mike's?
Yeah.
It's Jersey Matt's.
Yeah.
It's Michigan Matt's.
Yeah. It doesn't change my passion for, salted meat and cold cuts.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh man. So what are you getting on this, Matt?
It's got a really, really nice sweet palate right at the start, and then some of those rye characteristics come through. So right at the start, there's that sweetness from the honey. There's a little bit of caramel as well. Then some peppercorn comes through on the palate as it gets a little bit further. Then I'm picking up more of those rye characteristics. There's some pie crust, like a little bit of wafered cracker, and a subtle sweetness. Nice and approachable. Finish it has a good flavor to it. It doesn't burn, goes down really well. Just really nice, approachable, good sipping whiskey. It's got, again, like we were saying on the nose, it's got great characteristics from the bourbon, great characteristics from the rye, a little bit of the barrel influence as well. And certainly, I think it drinks older than 3 years. I think it doesn't have any of those often off-putting younger notes to it. I think it drinks really well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Matt. And it is funny you say that because you get that sweetness initially, and then you get the spiciness from the rye. I get a little of that, like almost like an herbal tea on the finish. There's a little bit of a drying effect, but not overly drying for me, because I'm not a big fan of that. But this one, it strikes that right balance. There's the sweetness, the spiciness, a little bit of tannic effect, but that kind of tea, herbal tea type of note on there as well, which I really enjoy. That I'm pretty sure is coming from the rye whiskey. So, Hank, what about you? I mean, we didn't ask you about the nosing notes, but in terms of the palate, you want to jump in there? You got anything to add? Or, well, I always like to say, what did Matt miss?
Well, Mark, I know what I know. I just want to see what you know.
There you go. Yeah. That's right. All right.
No, I think you guys. There's nothing I would add additional. Pie crust. I always tell people it's got a little key lime pie note to it. So, and you mentioned the cut grass. Scott Beyer, who we talked about earlier in the program, he's our master blender, and for 10 years he was actually a ranch hand on a ranch in Florida. So he always says, "Man, this reminds me of that hayloft."
Oh yeah,
you get all so right around your cut grass as well. So no,
very very cool.
You guys took all my thunder.
Well, yeah, I really enjoy this one, and we're actually, I think that's probably a good point to wrap up round one there. And Matt, final thoughts on the straight whiskey?
It's good. I like picking up both characteristics of the rye and the bourbon in it. I think it's blended together really well. It's proofed really well. Very nice, very approachable. A really good drinking whiskey.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely like this. And this, Hank, in terms of the pricing, what's the pricing on this?
So this is about a $64 price point.
Okay. All right. That's fair. I mean, like Matt said, I think it drinks older. I know it says aged a minimum of 3 years. So you have to quote the minimum of the barrels that are in there. So who knows? There could be older barrels, obviously. But yeah, like Matt said, I don't get any of that youth coming through from the bourbon or the rye on it. So obviously the river aging seems to have played well into that and advanced the aging for you guys more so than just if it were in a rick house. At least that's going to be my theory on that one.
Well, I'd love to say, we actually had some 15 year that we snuck in there, but no, these are, I think the oldest is on here is actually like 4 years in a day or a month.
All right.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, guys, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more with Hank Ingram from OH Ingram River Aged Whiskey in just a minute. Spirits of French Lick crafts their spirits using only the finest agricultural product that has defined character, following their motto, respect the grain. They lead the way in representing the quality of the Hoosier artisan distilling process while paying tribute to its inseparable past. By implementing best practices from those early times, combined with modern touches, Spirits of French Lick has created a truly unique place in the industry. Spirits of French Lick products are distributed throughout Indiana, Kentucky, and Missouri, and can also be purchased online through Sealbox at sealbox.com. Visit spiritsoffrenchlick.com to learn more information and make sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky.
All right, everybody, welcome back for round 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by 340 Lux. I'm your host, Mark. And with me, like I said earlier, in the Bourbon Life Studios, he's here in person tonight, my good friend, my buddy Matt. Matt, how you doing, man?
Hey, Mark. I'm doing really great. How about yourself?
Hanging in there, having a good time tonight. You know, it's always fun. It's funny, Matt, because some days you just like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to have to do a podcast this evening, and it's been a long work day, and you feel run down. And then you start hanging out, and you start having a few drinks, and you start talking and having a good conversation. And it's like everything just kind of falls away, and it's a good time. It always happens, and I love the way that happens.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. There's some days when this feels like work going into it, and by the end of it, I'm always so glad we get to sit down with a great guest and you and I together and have a good time.
Yep, definitely, for sure, Matt. Especially this week of Thanksgiving, man. Lots of things to be thankful for, and obviously being able to do this podcast with you and have great guests like Hank on, it's something that, as an attorney, if I just did that day in and day out, I'd probably lose my mind. So I'm thankful for the opportunity that we get to do this, man, for sure. So you want to tell everybody who we have with us, Matt?
Absolutely. We have Hank Ingram, the founder and CEO of OH River Aged Whiskey. Hank, welcome back for round 2.
I'm still here.
You know, after Matt left off the Ingram on that name, you might want to, you know,
I thought we said it was OH River.
It's OH Ingram River Aged Whiskey.
Okay.
So a lot of people ask, well, OH, Ohio Ingram? I'm like, no, it stands for Orrin Henry Ingram. So that's my name, and I got 3 other family members with that same name. So.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
But I go by Hank. It was a little easier to take to the playground than Orrin.
Than Orrin. Yeah, I could see where that could be an ass-kicking name, unfortunately. You know, it's like, hey, Orrin, come here. And it's like, Uncle, say Uncle. Yeah, you don't want that to happen. I've got a cousin, I had a cousin, his name, he was a third, and his name was actually Grover Cleveland. The third. So his father was Grover Cleveland. And his grandfather was Grover Cleveland. Everybody called him Buddy, thankfully for him. And his dad was Bud, so everybody dropped that Grover Cleveland. But yeah, so sometimes your parents, you just got to be like, come on, man, you're going to make my life hard. Come on. But that's cool. Speaking of your family, you know, we kind of talked about you earlier, but again, you know, doing some research for the show, looking at some things, and you really come from a background, I mean, a very entrepreneurial background. You talked about the river industry, the barge industry that you guys are involved with, but it kind of goes back several generations, doesn't it? The involvement with different businesses, and you got some entrepreneurial blood flowing through those veins, right?
Yeah, I'd like to take. I like to count my blessings and say I had some folks that set a high bar, and I'm just trying to come close. I think it really all started, at least with the first OH Ingram. Back in the mid-1800s, he was trained as a lumberjack essentially in the Northeast, then moved over to the Midwest and took part in logging operations in the Chippewa Valley, and really built up a business in lumber, which at that time, and not as much today, but back then, again, the river was the railroad. So the lumber would be cut down, and the only way they could ship it was to roll it down the hill and into the river, and then the sawmills would all be along the banks of the river, and so once the logs got to the sawmills, that's where they'd be processed into boards. But he really built his own business from the ground up, and then from there, I'd say each kind of successive generation took kind of the start that their predecessor had left them, and took a new way to, or thought of a new way to take that idea or an idea and get into some new areas. And I'd say while the barge business is also on the river, we've been in the book business, we've been in the oil business, we've been in DVD distribution business. So there's kind of been some crazy things in the chain, but at the end of the day, it's fun to have this almost like this challenge of, all right, so what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, that's cool. It can be a curse, I guess, at times, where you're like, oh, I've got to do this, or I've got to prove that I can do this as well. But then again, like you said, it's a challenge, and when you're your own competition, it can be pretty amazing what you're able to achieve. So, I mean, good for you. I mean, I'm glad you've got that background and that family history, but you've obviously continued to build on that, which is really cool. So let's talk about what we have poured up in this second round here, Hank.
Yeah, so this is our Straight Rye. So this was actually the second product we released. It's 98 proof, similarly aged at least 3 years. This is a 51% rye, 45% corn mash bill. So it's going to have a little bit more of that corn sweetness than you'd see in a 95.5, for instance. This has been a really lovely mash bill for us, and this was actually one of the very first barrels that we tried back when we were looking to get into the business. We had some experimental barrels, and I had this mash as one of those barrels, and this was the one that really spoke to me at the time. I like to say, and I'm just going to jump on some tasting notes so you guys don't take all the good ones, but when I'm at these festivals and events, and it's just me, Scott, and Steven, who's our brand manager. That's the entire company. So, we're trying to run them through and tell 500 people what exactly we're doing at these festivals. But I like to say, think of this as a Manhattan without the vermouth in terms of its flavor. It's going to be sweet, a little bit of dry on the back end, but it's going to have this nice cherry finish too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, what are you picking up in terms of the nose on this one?
The first thing I got on the nose of this was like a nice aroma, like sweet bubble gum, right on the front of the nose. And now as it's sitting and airing out a little bit more, picking up that influence from the corn, there's a sweetness that comes across. I almost get like sorghum with it. So like a sweet plant type aroma in there as well. And then there's like a touch of something botanical on it as well, just like a really kind of natural type flavor to it, and then like a kind of a smoky peppercorn near the end on the nose too.
Yeah, it's funny when I first nosed it, because I just had it in my head a rye, and I'm thinking 95.5, and I don't know why I was thinking that. So I'm expecting this really spicy, herbal expression to kind of hit me. And then it was like, this is really sweet. So I had to stop because I thought I had poured the bourbon instead of the rye. And I was like, nope, I got the right bottle. Okay. But no, I like it. And like Matt said, you get that sweetness, and then you get some of that spiciness as well. You get a little bit of that rye herbalness that comes through. But yeah, I really like this one on the nose. So we didn't steal your thunder, Hank, at all. You beat us to the punch on that one for sure. There's no doubt about it. So we were talking about, you're in school, you talked to your godfather, you came up with this idea. You did the plan in your business class, and then you decided, you know what, I think I'm going to go through with it. So you got to talk to Jeff Arnett, who was the master distiller down there at Jack Daniel's, now actually has his own brand company distilling now, I believe. Is that the name of the company? Yep. So Jeff's there, but so what happened now? I mean, what was the process? Was it just like, okay, I've talked to Jeff Arnett. He thinks it's doable. My godfather thinks it's doable. I'm doing it. Was that kind of the way it worked?
I wish. Nothing's ever simple. Well, being in business school, I wasn't exactly cash flow positive. So I asked my dad. I said, Dad, I really want to try this. Would you be willing to support me in this? And he said, in a very, very limited fashion. And so I said, is that a yes? So that's the tone. Okay, that's what I'm working with. And so I set out to figure out how are we going to do this thing. I thought, okay, we got a barge. We're going to take a couple barrels. We'll put it on the barge and see what happens. And turns out there's a thing called the TTB and the Treasury and all these entities that want to get their tax revenue, and they want to make sure that you are doing everything to protect that revenue.
So you can't just show up and float some barrels and call it good, huh?
Exactly. In fact, it really got interesting when we started talking to a couple different attorneys who said, well, according to the rules and regulations, it is illegal to warehouse spirits on a vessel. Sorry.
Oops.
Okay. So I got turned down by several attorneys. They just said, nope, it's clear and cut, not going to happen. There was actually a gentleman out of Frost Brown Todd who had been on vacation at had been on vacation and then at a conference, and then, long story long, he got back to me about 3 weeks after I had gotten all these rejection letters, and he said, yeah, I think I got an idea. And so we said, okay, well, let's sit down. And he said, well, I was just at this tax conference, and they talked about a Supreme Court case called Lozman. This was 2014. And the sum of it was this guy had a floating house. And he said, well, I don't owe property taxes. They wanted to charge him wharfage taxes instead of property taxes. And he said, well, it's not a vessel, it's a house that floats. And he ultimately won the Supreme Court case, although they wound up impounding and destroying his floating house before he won. So, even winners don't always win. And the precedent was essentially set that just because you float, you're not automatically a vessel. And we used that Supreme Court case decision to argue to the TTB, which is the Tobacco, Alcohol, Tax, and Trade Bureau. You can see why it's TTB for short. They oversee everything that is alcohol, and they're the final say on anything. We made that argument to them, and we did so in an experimental fashion. So there's a certain reg that says we can waive certain of the requirements if it's in advancing the maturation of or study of maturation for the spirit industry. The termination letter that they wrote actually said, yeah, we agree with your logic. And we were shocked. So we had this, but I'm skipping over about 18 months worth of back and forth. But ultimately, we got this experimental permit. We bought a couple barrels where I had to figure out what a bond is. You have to have a bond, which means you put up money or surety. So all of this learning, I just thought, okay, great, I got through it. Now the next thing. So we get these barrels, and we had a couple in MGP and a couple on our barge. After about 6 months, well, really every 3 months, I was going out there with my buddies like, see, doesn't it taste great? Doesn't it taste? We're drinking 3-month-old whiskey. It's not that great. But at the end of 6 months, we take the control samples and the whiskey off the barge, and we compare the two. And what we saw in 6 months was a development of flavor and profile that was more robust. It was rounder, softer. It had a better color. It was really kind of interesting. I mean, even in 6 months, what aging in one versus the other would do. And I know 6 months is not a long time for bourbon, but it gave me the confidence to say, okay, let's go for it. And so that was 2017.
Okay.
Fast forward another 18 months because nobody wanted to touch this again and be the person that approved this as a DSP. But ultimately, we won out and actually now have the only floating bonded rickhouse barrel house in the world.
Very cool.
Huh.
Yeah, man. Hard work pays off, right?
Yes, eventually. You just hard work and persistence, and maybe a little bit of stubbornness too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think in this industry, you got to have that, right? To be able to make a name for yourself. So, I mean, kudos to you for sticking with it and not saying, nope, not going to happen, and, walking away from it. So what was it? I mean, because we've talked before that you grew up in the barge industry. You're familiar with the history of the bourbon. Was that really what it was that made you think, oh, you know what? Well, I could probably just put these barrels on a barge and see. I mean, so that was just the experimental side of you and your brain that just said, hey, let's try this.
Yeah, I mean, I quite frankly didn't have a lot of bourbon knowledge. As I was going through this, I saw, of course, everybody talks about Jefferson's, and there's been a couple others that have floated things down the river, and I lost my damn mind, thinking, oh great, are they going to beat us to the punch? Are they going to? And nobody ever really, particularly the river things, never landed, I'd say, and we just said, okay, keep our head down. We're going to work on making this happen. Once we got our DSP to be fully operational, actually we had applied as a warehouseman only. We don't have a distillery, and so in Kentucky, you can't sell alcohol as a warehouseman. They never envisioned that somebody would just have a warehouse and then sell the whiskey. So I had to then wait another 6 months to get the next permit. I'm going to write a book one day. Just the comedy of errors of it's like, okay, we're ready. And, oh, no, we're not. Turns out we need to wait another 6 weeks.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's trial by fire right there for sure. But I think it makes you, at least my experience has been when you go through something like that, it makes you appreciate it a lot more, I think, than if it was something that was an easy process. So you've obviously paid the price and the blood, sweat, and tears, the equity to get in there and make it happen. So, and here you are. That's really cool.
That's
definitely.
right.
Matt, let's jump back over to this rye. Let's talk about it in terms of the palate and the finish. What are you picking up on it, man?
It's got that peppercorn right on the front of the palate, the really predominant, which is surprising at 51% rye. I would expect to get a little bit more sweetness, but I pick up like a really pronounced cracked black pepper right from the start. Then it kind of leads way to a marbled rye bread type flavor, and those cherries that you were talking about, kind of that Manhattan without the vermouth, the cherry note comes in there, and then it almost to me tastes like a little bit, has kind of some similar characteristics like a rice wine. So there's like a nice, like flavorful dryness to it that reminds me of a rice wine. I really quite like that too. It's unique. I don't think I've tasted anything that I've ever described quite like that. I like it a lot.
And this one comes in, this was aged at a minimum of 3 years. Is that right? Is that what we said?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, Matt, I agree. The first taste, you get that spiciness right on the palate. That cracked peppercorn. I think that's probably the best description that you can use for that. I still get some of that sweetness on it though. It kind of fluctuates back and forth. I get that initial spiciness, but then there's just a kind of my tongue is spicy. It's that peppercorn, but the rest of my mouth, I'm picking up like the sweetness on the sides of my tongue as well. So it's really unique. I don't get that drying effect like I did with that whiskey that we drank in the first round. But yeah, it's a long-lasting finish as well. And again, for the age, it doesn't drink as what you'd think a young rye whiskey would drink at all. It definitely shows more maturity than just what a 3-year-old would show. Definitely. How do we do, Hank?
Nailed it.
Awesome. So let's just talk about the process of the whiskeys themselves and how you arrived at that. So you've got these barrels. You're out there on the barge. Are you and your buddies just kind of picking barrels and thinking, hey, this tastes pretty good? I mean, or did you have a consultant that came in to help you all in terms of, okay, let's pick so many barrels? I mean, how does that process work in terms of I know you got Scott on board now. So can you just kind of talk in general about that process overall, how that works?
I had no clue what I was doing. I mean, really. And I didn't know there were consultants you could call for this stuff. I just said, okay, guys, well, first of all, I had to get the barrels on the barge. So this is a funny story. So talking about friends, I called up a bunch of buddies that I've been yammering on for years about trying to do this, and they were all excited finally because Hank's going to shut up and we can see what he's been talking about this whole time. So they all come out, and there was some miscommunication. I know what I said, but I don't know what they heard. And one guy shows up in a Lacoste polo and a Brooks Brothers khakis, and he'd just flown in internationally. He's like, I wasn't going to miss this. And I'm like, I guess you can throw on some work gloves, and here we go. But there's no handbook out there for how you load a rick house on a barge. And so we kind of had to figure out on the fly, how do you get the barrels from land into the barge that's floating, and make that seamless. And, oh, by the way, you have to do it 300 times that particular time. So all these guys show up. They're thinking, hey, we're going to drink Hank's whiskey. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to sit back. It's going to be cool. I put them all to work, and it's 90 degrees, and I didn't get anything that had electricity because you have to have explosion-proof equipment, which is expensive. I didn't put that in the budget, so I got hand crank and foot-operated pallet stackers to load this stuff. And so, but I was smart enough. I got the forks to be long enough that you could put 2 barrels on them. So when the guy starts pumping 1,100 pounds at a time, it takes about 12 pumps to get to the first level. It takes probably close to 80 pumps to get to the second level, which is a good 5 minutes of just straight pumping. And it's hot. That night, I had 2 friends left, and one of those was Scott. And he came back the next day and the next day, and I said, Scott, this was your job interview, and if you want to come, work in this, you got a spot, because I need a guy with muscle. I mean, I got accounting arms. He's used to throwing around hay bales. So that was how we got the barrels in the barge. We've now bought electric equipment that's made special purpose. There's like 2 guys in Kentucky that do it. You want to know them because there's a year-long wait, and we actually just got on production for the second piece of equipment. So it takes a long time even before supply chain. So Scott's been with me since 2020, and no, I take that back. 2019. He came on in 2019, and he and I would make all the blends ourselves, just the 2 of us. And literally, he was my first employee I hired, and my only until about 5 months ago. And so, which would be, now we have 2 employees. So Scott and I would get in, and we'd start drilling into these barrels. We'd collect samples, and then we'd mix and match them in the kitchen at my house. And Matt, you kind of remind me of Scott because he has the most robust imagination of anybody I know. And y'all's tasting notes sound so similar because he doesn't come up with things like, oh, the cracked pepper and the spice rack. And he comes up with, oh, this is banana Laffy Taffy. And, oh, man, I'm getting the yellow Smarties flavor. And after about 2 years of watching him iterate through as we blend these different mashes together and different barrels, I said, you know what? I think you're not really a director of operations, which had been his previous title. I said, you're a master blender. And so we elevated him to that position in September. So he's been with us from the start. And quite frankly, he is he's the reason for our success of flavor profile, I'd say. I got it up and going, but it takes a village to really make these things work.
Yeah, well, that's really cool, and you guys are doing a really good job. Matt, let's get some final thoughts on this Straight Rye, and we'll close out this round on that.
It's good. It's not like what I was expecting, which is actually kind of a nice change for the pace. 51-49 rye to corn was not what I was expecting, and I was expecting to get a whole lot of sweetness, and it's got a lot of depth and a lot of complexity with it as well. So I really like it. It's different than what I was expecting, and so far I've been really impressed.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that, Matt. Really enjoyed drinking that one. Now this one, I know you've got a couple that have won some pretty good awards. Was this one of the ones that did well? I can't remember.
Well, fortunately, they've all done pretty well. This one has done exceptionally well. Actually, it won Best American Rye at the Ascot Awards. Your friend Mr. Minnick, and then I think it's got a double gold from San Francisco and platinum from the SIP Awards. So it's been exciting to watch this one be so well received.
Very cool. That's awesome, man. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break and get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be back for the third and final round with Hank Ingram from O.H. Ingram River Aged Whiskey in just a minute.
Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they called Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Mark, and with me in person tonight in the Bourbon Life Studios, otherwise known as my basement, it's my good friend, my beanie-wearing buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing out there, man?
Mark, I'm, again, doing great.
You're still doing great. I'm glad you hung around, man. I'm glad you haven't left yet, because the show, it would just be, the tasting notes would just, I'd be stuck. I would just be stuck.
What is Thanksgiving without dessert? Nobody leaves before the final.
That's right. Before the final
has
round
been put out, right?
That's right. And this one, we've bumped it up a little bit here. But Matt, tell everybody who we have with us before we jump into what we're drinking.
Absolutely. We have the founder and CEO of O.H. Ingram River Aged Whiskey, Hank Ingram. He's back with us. Hank, welcome back again.
Gentlemen, let's do it.
Hey, and thanks for hanging out. Thanks for not leaving us, Hank, because that would have been a really difficult show to pull off if it was just Matt and myself to round out the show on round three with no guest.
Well, we've saved the blue label for last, which is my favorite. So I couldn't leave because it's funny, Matt. I use all dessert tasting notes because that's always on my mind. So let's do it.
Great.
Nice. A man after my heart.
Well, I'll tell you, there you go, Hank. And that's a perfect segue into just telling our listeners, if you wouldn't mind, what it is that we have poured up for our third and final round this evening.
For our third bottle expression here, we have the O.H. Ingram River Aged Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Now, this is a 105 proof wheated mash bill bourbon. So this is aged at least 4 years on the barge and is a 21% wheat, 74% corn or so. And this happens to be my particular favorite of the three that we've tried. But it's funny, my friend Scott, his favorite is the rye. So we are very much a house divided. But I look forward to getting into this one.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no kidding. That's pretty funny. So 105 proof, wheated bourbon. And this one is this also distilled by Green River? Was that?
This is also Green River, yes.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Matt, what are you picking up over there on the nose?
The wheat really comes across, and oftentimes with a wheated bourbon, when I first start to sniffing it around, I don't pick up so much the grain of wheat, and I'll pick up the wheat more in kind of the way it might be used, like a wheat bread or in some sort of a wheat product. But for this, I just pick up the grain. It smells like milled wheat right immediately from the nose. And it's got a sweetness of cherry, kind of like a cherry tart with there's also like a custard or like a vanilla icing kind of sweet aroma that comes across with it as well. Kind of like
that vanilla definitely.
Yeah. Very dessert like as well. And there is some oak. I can tell that this has definitely been set in barrels for a little bit.
Yeah, man, I like the fact you picked out that cherry because I'm definitely getting that. But that vanilla icing is spot on. It's got that almost like a birthday cake type of aroma to it, a nice sweetness to it. So it's a birthday cake with cherry on top. How's that?
Hey, I'll take it.
Hank, what did Matt miss?
He took the birthday cake. So, like I said, I go to desserts for my flavor profile. So we're well aligned.
Yeah. There you go. So let's jump in. Let's go back and talk some more about the blending process. When you're blending these, we talked about off air, these three expressions, the red, and I love the fact that it's red, white, and blue, the rye, the straight whiskey, and the bourbon. And these are your standard expressions. These are released. I mean, these are the ones that you have out all the time, correct?
That's right. And the reason for the colors, white for whiskey, red for rye, and blue and black for bourbon. So helps me keep it straight.
Gotcha. Did anybody give you a hard time for not using green for rye? I mean, just...
it's funny. Yeah, I get that on occasion, but I'm like, I don't know why green and rye go together, so I just chose red. Sorry, I like red. I don't like green. It's not my color.
I don't know that there's really any explanation. I've never seen or heard a true explanation on that. Matt, do you have any idea why green is always the color of rye?
I always assume and associate green with rye because it's often herbal. And when I think of herbs, think of green. Oftentimes a grassier aroma as well. So
yeah, but corn's a grass. It's green.
Well, the grain of corn isn't green. I guess the grain of rye isn't green. Anyway,
I digress. But yeah, so no, that's funny. So when you're doing these blends, you're doing these expressions, what kind of batch, I mean, how are you working in terms of processing? Is it like a small collection of barrels that you're putting together, or is it just a continual, how does that work?
Well, it's a process that we've been refining continually. What I'll say is my goal right now is not to replicate a previous flavor. It's to improve upon a previous batch. And at some point, we'll probably reach a level at which we say, okay, this is it. This is as good as we can do. Now let's try to replicate that. I enjoy trying to challenge ourselves and try the combinations. What we'll do is start with, depending on the availability of what's of the right age that we are looking for, we'll take 50 to 75 barrels and we'll try them all. And, it's a fun business until you try to drink 50 barrels of whiskey. And so trying to, get through that has been an interesting challenge. We've learned some ways to not pass out on the floor while we're doing our blends, but we'll wind up narrowing it down to about 20 to 25 different barrels for each batch.
Okay, so you kind of let the barrels kind of guide you on what you're doing. So you're not looking right now for a specific profile for each time you batch it, but you're looking at the barrels and what tastes good and what you guys come up with in terms of a final blend.
That's right. We've done about 4 batches so far on the rye, 3 on the bourbon. And so I think as we keep going through it, we learn a little bit more each time. And quite frankly, I think each batch has, in fact, gotten better than the previous. So
good.
We do try to create a base blend, and then based on what we're getting kind of from, say, the first 15 barrels, we'll look for 5 or 10 more to round out the expression and fill in the holes based on whatever tasting notes we'd identified in the other batches. And that's kind of how our process goes.
I gotcha. So when these barrels are coming in, are they new make? I mean, is everything new make, or are you buying barrels that have already had some age on them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because I want everything to be river aged, we don't do anything sourced. We're all contract. So
Okay.
I actually 2 weeks ago was up at the barge. We had 800 barrels of wheat coming in, and it took us about 4 days to get through it. But they were filled on Monday, and they were on the barge on Tuesday.
Wow. That's really impressive. Well, I'll just take one for the team, and I will throw Matt in with this. Anytime you need help tasting through those 75 to 85 barrels, Hank, just feel free to let us know.
Yeah.
We'll take one for the team. We'll be there for you.
You said it's a real challenge. Mark and I are always up for a challenge.
I will take the help.
So that's
man,
cool that you've got all new make coming on there, distilled, barreled on a Monday, put on a Tuesday. And you said you have a floating bonded warehouse. So we can only assume that there will be bonded products coming from you in the future, correct?
Well, at some point, because we don't have our own distillery, we won't be able to do a bottled in bond. Mm-hmm. But, I think the best way to describe us is if Four Roses suddenly had an earthquake and there was a bunch of water and their rickhouse became Noah's Ark and started floating, that's essentially what we've done. And so we use the motion of the river, the heat and the humidity from the steel and the evaporation off the river. All that comes together, really those 3 elements, to slightly change the way the whiskey and the barrel are working together than you would get in a traditional rickhouse. And so it stays in the barge. That's our rickhouse. That's our barrel house. There's no other off-site storage, and this is just a finishing portion of it. It is from new barrel of whiskey until it's time to pull off. And we are working on older expressions, but I just didn't want to be having this conversation with you guys 3 years from now. I figured we could probably find some good stuff to go ahead and sell now.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so I'm going to ask the question because I grew up on the Ohio River, but up in northeastern Kentucky. So as a kid, it was always fun if we were out on the river. You always see the barges go by, putting out the big waves, and get on your boat and get behind them. But most of the time they're hauling coal. But there's these big open containers. So, I mean, the barges that you're using, can you kind of talk about what they look like, and are they enclosed? I mean, what's the structure on those?
That's a great question. So this is an old corn barge, and actually these are old corn barges. We've just built our second barge. So it's about a 200-foot long structure, 35-foot wide on the outside. The interior is a little bit more than 5,000 square foot. And it's basically it's just a metal box.
Okay.
And so there's 2 types of barges. There's an open hopper barge, which you see in the coal trade, mm-hmm. And there's the tank barges that you move oil and stuff around with. Well, those open hopper barges, they do make fiberglass covers for them to cover up water sensitive cargoes, of which corn, grains, cement, those are in that category. So we have a fiberglass cover that weighs, there's 9 different pieces to it. Each one weighs 2,000 pounds, so no one's lifting up the top and sneaking a barrel out, not without a lot of friends. And so At fiberglass, we actually experimented with different coverings for the barge back in our experimental days. We tried a steel top, which was a full steel box. It kept in too much humidity, and we didn't like the way that it was affecting the whiskey as much. The fiberglass allows it to get hot, but it also has a dome effect, so you're able to kind of vent out some of this air. We do actually have a vent that removes the vapor off the bottom, because the vapor of whiskey is heavier than air. It's explosive, and we don't want our barge to blow up.
Sure.
So we've designed it with airflow. It's got vents around the edges that bring in the air, but it does draft into the water. So we have water, we have air, and the sun. The sun hits the steel, heats it up to 125 degrees during the day in the summertime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've had the unfortunate pleasure of being in that on that day, taking samples and almost stroked out. And then at night, when the sun goes down, it gets down into the 70s and 80s. So you can get a 40-degree temperature swing in a single day.
Wow.
And all of that's just working the whiskey differently into the barrel.
Yeah, I was going to say, because not only are you getting that interaction, the whiskey going in and out of the barrel as it expands and contracts due to the heat and the cooling, but you're also getting that motion from the water. I mean, I know it's a barge and it's a huge vessel, but there's still going to be some movement of the barge itself that's going to move the whiskey around in the barrel, and I'm assuming that provides more contact internally with the staves and everything. Is that correct?
That's right. It also increases the oxidation a little bit too. So
okay,
just kind of a fun added fact. And actually, I think that's where we're getting some of these fruitier notes from the rye and some of the bourbon too. Just a little of that extra oxidation that occurs that you don't necessarily see in a land-based facility.
Yeah, so you're getting those additional esters that are coming out from that oxidation that are giving you that kind of fruity notes and fruity tones to it. So
yeah, that's right.
Very, very cool. I can't imagine being in a barge at 125 degrees, even if I was going to be drinking whiskey straight from the barrel. So I'm curious. You're talking about when you had to do them manually and putting the barrels on. How high are your barrels in that facility? I mean, how tall are you doing it? How many levels? Yeah,
so our second barge is, I'd say, perfected off of our learnings from our first barge. The second barge goes 7 barrels high and 10 barrels wide. So we're able to get about 3,000 barrels per barge, and that's the design that we'll be replicating. We're actually, this second barge is going to be full based on our fill rates next year. And so we're already looking at what does barge 3 look like, and we may raise the roof up a little bit more and try to get 4,000 barrels, which when you think about the capacity of a barge, it's about 1,500 tons. 4,000 barrels that weigh 500 pounds, give or take, each. It's still not even pushing up against the limit of what that barge can hold.
Wow. You said raise the roof, and I just about broke into anyway. I refrained from doing so. So you guys are located, we talked earlier a little bit. It's in Wickliffe, right outside of Wickliffe. Is that right? Wickliffe, Kentucky?
That's right.
And that's in Ballard County. So what was it that made you decide that this was the place where you wanted to house these barrels on these barges?
Well, mellowed on the Mississippi sounded a lot better than aged on the Ohio, for one. Nothing against the Ohio, it's just the alliteration. I really wanted to be on the Mississippi River, right below the confluence where the two rivers come together. So Wickliffe is directly across from Cairo, Illinois. You've got Cairo, Illinois, you've got Missouri, and you've got Kentucky right there. So you have the 3 states. We chose to be below that confluence because right now is a perfect example. It is historic low water on the Mississippi River.
Right.
In fact, the gauge, while we were loading barrels, we still had water below the barge, but it wasn't a lot. The gauge at Cairo was 7 foot. That doesn't mean anything except to know that normal is about 30 foot.
Ooh, wow.
High water is, I think, 45 feet. So you can imagine almost being 40 feet below what the high water mark is. It was pretty drastic. I have never seen that much of the river bottom exposed. So being on the Mississippi River, right there, we get to take advantage of the upper Mississippi River and the Ohio. And a little breaking news for you guys, we're actually going to be moving the barges from Wickliffe down about 12 miles to Columbus, Kentucky. We have secured a facility there that will allow us to grow to 20 barges and beyond, whereas our first facility was really kind of limited to just the test of what does a barge on the river with bourbon do. So I haven't told that to anybody yet, but yeah, we're going to actually be moving. The barge can't move itself; it has to have some help, but we still get the same advantages of being on the Mississippi River. Now we just get to move to a place. It'll be in Columbus, Kentucky, which is Hickman County, where we have a lot more room to expand and really create a fleet of floating warehouses.
Well, that's very cool. Well, thank you for sharing. And I didn't get to use my radio voice. Breaking news. But we appreciate you sharing that with us. That's really cool. Congratulations on that. Because I was going to ask, there's got to be a point where someone's going to say, look, you've got 4 floating barges out here with 12,000 barrels of whiskey total. We can't accommodate you here on the river. You need to move. So you found a place, obviously, which is really cool. So let's talk about the whiskey, Matt, because we're almost at the end of round 3 here, which is kind of crazy because this has gone by really quick. What do you think in terms of the palate and the finish on this bourbon?
It's got a lot of those weeded flavors that I really like. Like right up front, pick up some red wine fruits. There's like some cherry, maybe a touch of strawberry, but like a really savory grape. Just really luscious, dark kind of grape. Then it's got, again, I'm picking through kind of that like turnover crust or like that phyllo dough, kind of a buttery, crisp type flavor. And then on the finish, I get a lot of red apple, which not characteristic from a weeded bourbon, in my opinion. But I pick up really nice, crisp red apple and oak on the finish. Again, definitely tell that this is sat in the barrel for a good bit. It drinks mature.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, this is, if you say a 4-year-old bourbon to some people, they'll be like, oh, I'm not going to drink a 4-year-old bourbon. But this doesn't, I mean, there's no immaturity to this whatsoever. And Matt, I agree. I mean, this is a very nice bourbon, Hank. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, this is a really nice wheated bourbon. I really the mouthfeel with it, with the wheated bourbon, you get kind of a fuller mouthfeel, and I do get that with this, which I enjoy. But I think Matt nailed it when he touched on those notes. So again, I can't add much to it. Was there anything that he missed, though? That's the most important question of the night.
Always.
Well, no, look, I like my desserts. So, I always say this has got a little bit of that creme brulee thing going on. So maybe a little raspberry on top. So I think you guys have nailed it. I'll say we have a 6-year-old wheated mash bill on the barge that's been on the barge since our experimental days. And it's kind of our leading indicator of what we're going to expect to find. And it is this spicy apple goodness that at 6 years, I think is one of the best things that we've created yet. I've only got 1 barrel of it, and it's illegal to sell because it's under an experimental permit. So the only way that you can try it is to come up to the barge. But I'm excited about where this mash bill and expression's going to go.
Yeah, very, very cool. So let's talk about where things are going to go since we're at the end of round 3 here before we wrap it up. What does the future look like for you and for O.H. Ingram River Aged Whiskey?
Well, it's more barges, more whiskey. And we're going to be launching 2 new markets in 2023. So we're in 5 states right now, all along the Mississippi River. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Louisiana. We've got 2 more that we're going to be adding. So, I think 23 is it's the end of 22, so we all got to make predictions for what next year looks like. But I really think it's going to be more of us telling the story, and I love getting the scrutiny of, well, this is just a gimmick. And I say I welcome that curiosity, because you go out there and you get on the barge and you're like, okay, well, if it's a gimmick, they're sure selling the heck out of it.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, the flavor, like we said tonight, everything we've tasted, because I was wondering when I saw the age statement, and I try not to let age statements influence my tasting or anything, but you do have that somewhere in the back of your mind when you see 3 years old, you think, okay, there's going to be some youthful notes to this. It's going to be young. You're going to get some type of grain. You're going to get this or that. And I have been, I would say, surprised, I think, Hank, by everything. We've had it before, but it's always, when you start thinking about it in terms of the age and what the flavor profile on all these whiskeys were tonight, it's surprising. I mean, it really is. There's no other way to say it. I think people that haven't tried it, if they went in with that mentality of it's a young whiskey, I think they're going to be pretty shocked with what they come out with.
Well, all I can say is, at the end of the day, we think that there's a place for river aged on every shelf, because I can see behind you there, Matt. All those bourbons were aged the same way. Some just a little bit longer than others, but really, when you throw in the motion, the temperature and humidity that's different, it's our goal to just create something a little bit more unique.
Yep, very cool. So you're available in 5 different states. You got 2 more coming. Where can people find more information about you guys?
Of course, ingramwhiskey.com. We've got our brand finder page if you're looking for a bottle near you. Our 2022 flagship is in stores now, in a few stores left, I should say. It's kind of meant to be our take on the birthday bourbon, or kind of the pinnacle of our fleet of products. ingramwhiskey.com, along with Ingram Whiskey on socials. Check us out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Hank, before we wrap it up, Matt, final thoughts on this bourbon?
This is great. I think everything we've had tonight has been unique. I think the river aging definitely adds a lot to it that I just wasn't expecting. When you look at these on paper, the first round was a blend of both rye and bourbon, but it is very congruous where you get the blend together, but I was able to pick out both the rye and the bourbon and different aspects from both of them. And then second round, the rye just being so unique and so different from what I was expecting, I think. And then the wheated as well, the final round, just everything was blended really well, expertly blended, proofed really well, drank really well. Just delicious products, and I think you all are doing a really great job with it, and it shows that there is something going on in the river aged whiskey. I really like it, and I'm super excited to see where the future goes for you all.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Really, really excited to see where it goes. And Hank, I'm going to have to agree with you. The bourbon was my favorite of the night, so that's my winner. Matt, what about you? You have a winner?
That wheated is good, but I actually really enjoyed the first round. The blend, the blend, the straight whiskey. Yeah. I thought that was really good.
Well, great. All right. So, Hank, before we wrap it up, anything you wanna add? Final thoughts or anything?
No, just pleasure to be with you guys. And if anybody ever wants to come out to the barge, just keep waiting, because we're gonna have a tasting experience one day, but it ain't ready yet. if you show up. There's no whiskey trail out there yet.
Right? It'd be another 6-month waiting period to get a license to do that as well, right?
Well, yes. The river makes things a lot more complicated in several fronts, so that's all I can say. More to come.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Matt, final thoughts before we wrap it up, send it out.
Hey, thanks for taking the time tonight. We had you booked forever, and I'm glad we finally got to get this show out for everybody, because we've been waiting for this one for quite a while. So thank you for taking the time, for walking us through your flagship products, what you've got coming out, and giving us a glance into the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hank, thanks for taking the time with us during Thanksgiving week, especially to sit down with us and spend some time with us. Of course, this comes out on Friday, so it's the day after Thanksgiving. So obviously, everybody, happy Thanksgiving out there. Thank you all for spending some time with us. Hank, thank you as well. Appreciate you sending us the samples to enjoy. Definitely have enjoyed all of those. And we are the Bourbon Life Podcast, presented by 340 Lex. You can check them out online at 340lex.com. It's a really unique property in downtown Lexington. It's just kind of a home base. If you're here in Kentucky exploring the Bourbon Trail, you can have a home base there. It's got modern amenities and a little bit of bluegrass charm to it as well. So it's a really unique space. So check that out. We want to thank all our other sponsors as well. We appreciate everything they do for us. And we appreciate you all listening wherever you are, whatever time of day it is. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with us just a little bit. You can always find us on social media at The Bourbon Life. Join our private Facebook group, The Bourbon Lifers. We'd love to have you in there. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to send us an email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up. Send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the Bourbon Life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the Bourbon Life.